And we're going to continue with our strength, muscular endurance, and power training. We looked at circuits in our last session. And what we're going to do now is I'm just going to drag you down and we're going to start to have a look at the idea of free weights. Free weights. And let me be clear that free weights are an example of weight training or resistance training. Make sure you're familiar with those terms as we go forward. A couple of things I'd like to stress that I think are absolutely crucial to what we're doing here is that free weights provide, in many ways, the most exciting form of training because they have such huge variety. So you're going to find resistance training free weights almost as a central feature of almost any training program because, okay, even if we are an endurance athlete, long distance runner, triathlete, we're going to do a lot of weight training because the variety, the fact it can be manipulated, more of which in a second, to such a degree means it's almost relevant to everybody. So that in itself is a very exciting concept with free weights. We also want to understand with free weights that it does something a little bit different to using, say, resistance machines, in that it develops what we would call synergists. Now, I'm not sure the word synergist is going to appear in your exam, but the word synergist means that if, for example, you see here, this person is using a Smith's machine to push this, to guide this bar up, and it can only go in one single direction, whereas this bar here can wobble around as it's being pushed, it's completely free. Synergists are like additional muscles which also impact on the lifting. Now, in some contexts, we don't want to develop those synergists. Bodybuilders, for example, tend to want to highlight and focus one individual muscle. They do that through technique often. But synergist development also can increase our overall strength. So it is an advantage, really, of the free weights methodology. I should say, actually, when we talk about free weights, we are talking about, to a large extent the concept of dumbbells and barbells. Dumbbells and barbells, okay? So let's see if I can show you some examples of these. Look, this is a barbell on here with weights on the end. So is this person on dumbbells? I'm not sure, with weight there. So a dumbbell is just one of the shorter versions of it. So if we've got a bar and a weight on the end and we lift it with one hand, that's what we mean by a dumbbell. If it's a barbell, it's lifted with two arms. In fact, here, look, this is a dumbbell here. So just make sure we understand that basic concept. We can also say that the free weights, I mean, it's a really positive thing because it's good if we've got limited equipment, good with limited equipment. So for example, if we've got a few dumbbells and we've got a few barbells, we can do a huge variety of training with that limited equipment. Okay, so you don't necessarily need things like Smith machines. As an example, we need a stack of weights and a few benches and we're good to go. Well, as long as we understand what we're doing, of course. A couple of other technical things. I'm going to get into different types of athletes in a second. We often find that exercise order is particularly important here. Exercise order. And what we're going to find in many cases when we do resistance training, again, a little bit like the circuit training, we're going to sometimes work on the core, we're going to sometimes work on the legs or the lower body, and we're going to sometimes work on the upper body. And the order of exercises will often take this into account. Sometimes you'll find people talk about, I did a leg session, I did a shoulder session. That is also a concept as well, where you overload a particular area of the body. But assuming it's whole body training, we'll do some core, some legs, some upper body. So it's worth considering within that context. Another concept with regard to exercise order with free weights, we also should think that very often an athlete will use an order where first they push in an activity and secondly they pull in an activity. So can I give you an example of that? Well, first of all, here we've got the idea here is on the lift of a chest press, you're pushing a bar upwards, but an alternative to that is then to pull yourself up on something like a chin up in this case, or you pull on a pulley over here, and you can actually pull that. So often what we find is the push and pull works with antagonistic pairs of muscles, and we can actually get to the concept of what we call a superset. Okay, a superset. A superset is, for example, if you go into the gym and you do some leg press, for example, which is developing your quadricep. In the recovery for that exercise, you might do some leg curls and work on your tricep strength, for example. And we call those supersets. It's a push and a pull. So that's useful for us to also have an awareness of. But really what I want to do now is I want to get into types of different athletes. So let's imagine, for example, we've got an athlete and they're interested in developing max strength, or what we call muscular strength here. Well, what are they going to do in terms of the FIT principle? Well, I would be expecting here that in terms of the FIT principle that the intensity for maximum strength is going to be around about 90% of 1 rep max. 1 rep max. And you might be thinking to me, okay, James, what is 1 rep max? Well, 1 rep max is the weight that a performer can do a particular movement to their maximum. So let's say that this guy here, I think it's a guy, let's say that they can lift this bar here and they're capable in their maximum of lifting 100 kilograms, okay? 100 kilograms, that's their absolute maximum lift. Well, their 1 rep max would be 190% of that would be 90 kilograms, for example. And in that sense, the athlete is then going to work in their training at 90%, but they're not going to do 1 lift. They might do something like 6 repetitions, 6 reps at 90%, and that would be very, very challenging. What then would we be looking to do if we're looking at the notion of strength endurance, or what we might refer to as muscular endurance? Okay, what might we do in this situation? Well, similar sort of concepts, but this time we're looking at 50 to 60% of one rep max, and in this case we'd often be looking at 20 repetitions, so a much longer set. But in this case we do 20 repetitions. Often you'll find that people do 21s, very popular number with muscular endurance or strength endurance training, 21 lifts. So that would be, for example, a much lighter weight on this bar, but lifting it up and lowering it down 20 to 21 times, 50 to 60% of 1 rep max. In this case, it would be maybe around about 50 kilograms. I mean, it's pretty heavy what we're talking about there. For something like chest press, it would be pretty impressive to be lifting that kind of weight. Well, maybe you don't think it is. I mean, it would be for me, let's put it that way. And the other thing I'd like you to kind of have an awareness of is that we also can develop power, or let's also refer to power as elastic strength. So how would we go about developing our free weight for this? Well, again, we want to be thinking about our 1 rep max, and here we're saying something like 75% of 1 rep max, and we might be doing something like 12 repetitions. But of course, in the elastic power sense, we would be doing these in a kind of explosive technique with large amounts of power. So I've already touched on some of the strengths and weaknesses, but just to formalize it, strengths, massive variety of exercise possibility. I mean, endless variety, really. We also like resistance training because it's good for the type. If you think about type from FIT, okay, type from FIT, it often addresses this point, okay? It becomes a different type of training, not least because it's so varied. But there are some negatives. So let's also address the negatives of this. Very often, people will lift with poor technique. Okay, and you may have seen this in gyms, especially guys, I think, who go and try and lift as heavy as possible, put strain on their back, put strain on their joints, for example. That is an issue with free weights. It has to be technically correct, and that needs to be learned. And the other point, excuse me, is the concept of resistance itself. Okay, resistance itself puts kind of weight-bearing strain on the body and has to be managed. So therefore, it can cause kind of injuries because it's got higher intensity of training within this training model. But basically, it's a very effective form of training. If done well, can provide huge gains in performances. And with good guidance and good protocols, we encourage you to take part in it and have a bit of a go at it. Of course, if you're going through a bit of a growth spurt, you have to sort of take it easy. If you're younger, take it easy. If you're elderly, take it easy. But as long as you stick to that concept of gradual and steady progression, then we should be good. Thanks.